As a youngster, I had no idea what my aims in life were, but if I like to go back to my early days in primary school, I suppose most of the games we ever played were sword fights, bows and arrows, playing cowboys and Indians. That would be our life back in the early 30s. I had created a small interest that maybe one day I might be interested in joining the forces, either the Army or the Navy. It also transgressed as we got a little older that the Governor-General was coming to South Australia for his first visit, and the government wanted to put on a great display, and they wanted to have a lot of stories about the sailors and singing the old sea chanties on the Adelaide Oval. Yes, what shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning? So Mum made me a sailor suit. I enjoyed the day out on the Adelaide Oval singing chanties. But just prior to this, of course, when I was 10, my brother had joined the Navy at 13. So my added interest, of course, in the Navy was caused by my brother, and he spent 4 years in the Naval College, and he became what was called Chief Cadet Captain, in other words, Head Prefect. But he didn't complete his 4th year because the war broke out, and they shifted the whole year off to sea as cadet midshipmen before they were given commissions. After that, I went from primary school to the high school, which I spent 1 year at the Woodville High School. I was put in the B stream class, and I never met such a bunch of larrikins that suited my lifestyle, because I was a larrikin. We even used to play cricket with the schoolmaster who'd come out at lunchtime and enjoy our company. So overall, it was a very good year for me and a lot of the class boys. But we were a bit of a larrikin mob. It was after this was completed, my father decided I needed a slightly better education, and he sent me off to a private school called Prince Alfred College, to which I attended for just a fraction over 4 years. Well, during my time at Prince Alfred College, of course, I discovered they had a cadet corps. The whole school, except those who would play scouts or wanted to do art, you had to join the cadet corps. So you wore a nice brown grey uniform with red stripes down the leg, and you looked quite dignified and smart in our uniform. So being a keen fellow, I attended the Saturday morning classes to learn to become an NCO, a non-commissioned officer. And I stayed there for 3 years, and eventually I reached the heights of a sergeant major. And by this time we didn't have any cadet officers left, and in my 3rd year, one of the school teachers who had been promoted to a captain as a commander, he said to me, "I'm promoting you to an acting cadet lieutenant, Nicholls." But one must remember this was in 43, you might say in the last 2 or 3 years of the war. And therefore most of our troops had been fighting over in the Middle East. Our Air Force was fighting in Britain, and our Navy was right through the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean and Indian Ocean and the North Sea. So I was still pretty keen to do my bit. I just wanted to be there. So I volunteered. I had a bit of a fight with my parents over this because they thought because my brother had already been there for 3 or 4 years of the war, that why should their second son go? So I nagged them all over the Christmas period. They finally signed my papers from memory in January 43. And I joined the Navy because under all the forces, it's the quickest way to see any action if it's going to be. Because in the Navy, you go and do 3 months in the Navy depot, doing basic training and marching, using a rifle, learning a bit of the language of the sea, and you spend the rest of your time learning while you're at sea, and that doesn't change even today. Where do you do your training? You do it at sea. After I called up, I hopped on the train at the Vodeo railway station. No one came to see me off. I didn't want them to see me off. I wasn't feeling emotional at all, but I went over to what we call Melbourne, hopped another train to Flinders Naval Depot, which they also called HMAS Cerberus, so we wore the cap, HMAS Cerberus. We lined up the first day, and the petty officer in charge said he wants a class leader. No one volunteered till one of my friends. He opened up and volunteered Stan Nicholls because he's an ex-sergeant major. So suddenly I'm voted in whether I liked it or not. So the day started off where I had to line the whole class up, and there is a picture of me in my little badge on my arm which says 54 class, and I marched them everywhere. The petty officer found out I was a good trainer, having had nearly 4 years of it in the Army Cadets. So I was constantly training them rifle drill and any other drill associated with weapons, and I marched them all around the depot to every function that we had to witness. So after this basic training was all over, after 3 months, a letter went around but sort of looking for people who may be interested in getting a commission. So I volunteered my name and applied to enter the officers training school that's called the OTS. That was a 16-week course, which once again we were put through all the sorts of training that you can imagine that one could be put through. We did navigation, we did flags, we did normal seamanship, we touched on a little bit of gunnery. We even spent 1 month on a ship called the Bingara, where I was allowed to fire one shell, 1 4-inch shell. And it didn't hit the target on my head, so I could see I wasn't being marked down as a gunnery officer. So that never occurred. I never found out. Well, after this training, we all did our final examinations in navigation, and I think all of us were successful, even though we never really got the results. They're a little strange in Navy ways about telling you any more than they have to. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were called up before Commander James, and all he said was, "Nicholls, Scully, Urquhart, you're on draft tomorrow, AM 0600. Well, being me, I couldn't help myself. "Sir, I'd like to know why we weren't successful." And all he did was repeat it again. "Nicholls, Scully and Urquhart, you're on draft at 0600 AM tomorrow morning." And that was it. The fourth man who didn't get it, Bob Spicer, he was already a petty officer, but he's what's called a round rig petty officer. He hadn't finished his time. So they promoted him and squared him off so he could wear round rig uniforms. The round rig are the officers because they wrap their jacket around themselves. They wear a coat. We wear the square rig because everything else is squared off with your collar, etc., etc. Next morning we left the depot, and the thing that annoyed me, I had no chance to get any money out of the bank. All I had in my wallet was 10 shillings, and I'm being sent up north to join the Shropshire. I had been appointed to the HMAS Gascoigne, which is my brother's ship. My brother was the first lieutenant, in other words, second in charge of the Gascoigne, but they found out that they would not permit Australians to have relations in the same ship. And this all resulted from the huge calamity on one of the American cruisers that got torpedoed and sank, where 5 brothers all died on the one trip. And that was a really disgusting state of affairs, that one family got wiped out in one blow. So I was sent to the HMAS Shropshire instead. Anyhow, we got on the train, we cruised all the way through up to Brisbane. The train wasn't too bad, except we were overcrowded. As you can imagine, in dog boxes, as we used to call them, where to be seating for about 8 people. There were 12 of us jammed in. There were fellas lying on the floor, sleeping on suitcases, you name it. It was pretty cramped up. So we get to Brisbane. Because I had no money, I took on being on the Naval Patrol, which is the same as the military police. And I said to Urquhart and Scully, because they were both Queenslanders, I tell you what, if you do the sub for me when I'm in Adelaide, knowing this was never going to happen, I'll sub for you and I'll take over your time on the Naval Patrol. So I became permanent Navy Patrol for a fortnight, 2 weeks. And one of the most interesting interludes was that we had to pick up any drunk on the street after 10 o'clock. There was a fight between an American and a silly sailor who drew a knife on him, and the American shot him, so that caused a bit of a ruckus, as you can imagine. So at 10 p.m. at night, no drunks permitted on the street at all. So we went across the Story Bridge in Brisbane, and just on the other side, down one or two of the back lanes, there was a house with about 8-foot wooden fence around it. It was a brothel. And there was this queue of 20 or 30 fellas lined up, sitting on seats waiting their turn. And guess what? The Aussies were selling their spots to the Americans at $20 a throw. Come and take my seat. Then they'd get on the end of the queue again and start up. Anyhow, we're only 18, us 4 kids with a very junior officer. We had to get the drunks out of the brothel. So my first time ever in a brothel, the madam left us in and she didn't like it at all. No doors or curtains, just beads on the door. And there was this fellow, with his socks on still, going his hardest. And the officer said, "Get him off." We both, 4 of us, went in, 2 each side, hoisted him off the woman, took him outside and dumped him in the truck. It was just like that. Well, I don't think the officer knew really what he was doing. Himself, it must have got the shock of his life. However, we thought it was very bloody funny, believe you me. I've been telling that story for years. I can still see the bloke with his black socks on, with his feet getting all excited. It really was a sight to believe. Anyway, after that we did leave Brisbane on a goods train. They converted steel trucks with 3-tier bunks inside with a 5-gallon ex-paint container for your urinal in the middle of the floor. However, you could get out and walk faster than the train. So most of us never used the bucket because you could run and catch up to the train. But then we arrived in Townsville. But the best part, as we walked down to get onto the ship, we went past a place, a prison, which held women. And the women were sticking their heads out of the prison windows when they saw us sailors. I suppose there were about 10 of us. And did they give us a right royal raspberry? I can't remember all the disgusting words they referred to us as, but we copped a lot. It was really an eye-opener. So anyhow, we got onto the SS Taruna, a very small freight ship. We used to do the trip between Melbourne and Tassie before this. We got on there, and our first interlude of fighting with authorities, when an army officer came up to both Urquhart, myself and Scully, said, "You're both on cookhouse duty." I said, "You got it wrong. We're from the officers' training school." Now that wasn't a lie, was it? I didn't say we got kicked out. And we're on our way to join the heavy cruiser HMAS Shropshire. Well, he got the hint. He didn't come near us again. We got fed like the rest of the troops, but the only dirty deal he did to us is to put our spot for hanging our hammocks, starboard side, forward, right out in the open, so when the wind blew and the rain blew, the hammock didn't save you at all. You copped the lot. So how we did enjoy that little victory anyway, because neither of us liked the bloke telling us you're on cookhouse duty. So the day we arrived in Milne Bay, there was the ship, 30 feet from the water level to the upper deck, and all the superstructures up higher. And that went up, the total height of the ship to the top of the mast was 120 feet. It looked positively massive. The HMAS Shropshire, or I should say the HMS Shropshire, was brought into being. It was the population of the county of Shropshire that we call in Australia, that raised for £6 million, and keeping in mind that Shropshire is a land-based county. The Shropshire was classified as a London class cruiser, even though it was named after a county. It was a little bit longer, a little bit narrower, and a little bit faster than the other county class cruisers. And they built something, I think it was about 11 in total of the county class type cruiser. But strange as it may seem, she was seen to be kept down the bottom end of the Atlantic Ocean or in the Indian Ocean a lot. Well, the sad case came, there was a battle in Guadalcanal when the Japanese attacked, caught in the middle of the night, and they sank 4 cruisers. HMAS Canberra was sunk, the 3 American cruisers were sunk, so we needed another heavy cruiser. We only had the Aussie left. It was discovered when they gave the ship to Australia, free of anything, by Mr. Churchill. It turns out that one of the bearings was seizing up on one of her propellers, and she could not steam at full speed. It could only do about 20 odd knots, where normally full speed was 32.6 knots. That our chief engineer and an ERA were looking at the bearings on this particular tail shaft, and they found it was marked incorrectly. So the Australian blokes changed it all. And after that we cruised round carrying out its maximum speed of 32.6 knots. So eventually when we got to Shropshire, she was completely rearmed by the Brits and by the Australians as they brought her back to Australia. The Shropshire was granted the Australian Navy in, I think it was October 42, but it wasn't commissioned as an Australian ship, and I think it was April 1943. They went into action later that year towards Christmas up at Cape Gloucester. I did not join her until the Admiralty Islands. We had 3 days of fresh food, and in 3 days it's gone. So you're down there living on dehydrated potatoes, dehydrated carrots, peas, beans. You always had fried eggs, then you had dehydrated eggs, made into scrambled eggs. It was like rubber. But really when you're hungry, you ate it. We didn't have refrigeration. Those ships were designed for the Atlantic and the North Sea, up there in Britain when it's cold. And the funny part about it, even though when we went across the American ships, and they did have beautiful food, in fact very rich food compared to us, when the Americans used to come over to us to do a job, they loved their food. We had bully beef. I hated bloody bully beef. Bully beef stew, bully beef soup, bully beef sandwiches. At least we got it cold. But in the end we did get some refrigeration. You get a slice of bully beef, 2 slices of bread. I had all my friends, Urquhart, Scully, Jack Pittman, a couple of others I can't think of, who used to come and sit by me when the food was served, because you had no say. You go with your aluminium tray with the indentations, you get slopped on right. You were lucky to get back to your seat if it wasn't all mixed up. They were waiting, what aren't you going to eat today, Nicholls? And they'd scoop it off my plate, I'd tell them. You know how I lived? Our canteen, which is run by a civilian team of 3 or 4 fellas, civilians, Barkley, dressed in uniform. And I would go there, spend my money on canned fruit. My locker being 2 by 2 by 2 feet, I'd squash as many cans in, I'd crumple all my uniforms up and everything. And when I was hungry, I'd get a can out, take the top off, and eat the whole lot. They weren't little tins, they were quite big tins. So that was the case of food. The ship is divided up amongst seamen into 4 areas: forecastle, foretop, maintop and quarterdeck. The main top and foretop, by the way, are right bang slap in the middle of the ship. The forecastle, of course, is really the sharp end. The quarterdeck is where the officers live. The ship was designed to take 760 men. When I joined it, she was nearly 1,100 men. So our job as seamen, ordinary seamen, all we did was scrub decks. So you'd start at 6 in the morning and you'd walk up and down pretending to scrub the deck, mopping it up, and even getting on your hands and knees with separate rags, mopping up little holes. You have to scrub out the toilets so nothing is missed. You do the whole lot, the deck, the bulkheads, the deck heads, everything. And you've got to dry it all off, down to the last drop, believe you me. And if you've got 2 hours to do it, and there's about 80 of you to do it, and you know they only need about 10, you do it over and over again till everything's shining. And that was just to keep you busy. Some of us really got a bit browned off with this, but you know, in the end I accepted the fact that, believe it or not, I became a fairly tolerant sort of bloke to doing these duties which I thought were just plain damn silly at any rate. I did that for 2 or 3 months, and then a commander left the ship and a new bloke called George Oldham came on board. Now, to tell you the rank of a commander on board any cruiser, he's the second in charge. He runs the ship for the captain. I became his runner and messenger. I had to be properly dressed every day. My socks had to be pulled up tight, so I had to dress properly. The only thing I think I disappointed him in that I didn't have a full sailor's uniform. You couldn't buy them out of the mess. I used to wear an open neck shirt. Anyway, he never said anything, so for the 6 months I was his runner. And believe you me, he was most helpful. Strange as it may seem, I didn't find out till later that he was a South Australian, where I came from. So after I'd spent my 6 months with Commander Oldham, I went back to part of ship for about, I think it was 1 or 2 months. I don't think that the Chief Petty Officer in the main top division liked me. He sent me on my first job down into one of the large motor cruisers, and so I was down over the ship's side with the thing moored to the ship, and it was bobbing up and down the whole time I had there, head down, arse up, scrubbing planks of wood to get the stains out with lime. Well, I've never vomited so much in my life before. I just couldn't move for being sick. Even though I appealed to him that I'd had enough, I had to stay there the whole bloody 4 hours. I was then told I had to climb up the rope, but I thought any minute, the way I was feeling, I was going to drop down and kill myself in the bottom of the boat. But I got up there and some kindly bloke leaned over and grabbed the rope and pulled me into the side of the ship, and I got in. But he didn't do that to me again, I must admit. But I did come good, and within another month after, I was then made Navigator's Yeoman. Funny thing about it, I had my own rolling ruler that my brother had given me, hoping I might get a commission. So I kept it with me because I needed it if I became a navigator. So I plotted all the ships sunk and anything else the commander wanted on their reports to make sure. But I didn't do the work when we were in action bombarding. That was out of the question. He needed a more qualified sub-lieutenant or lieutenant to do his work. So I did that for 6 months, and then I got a new Navigator's Yeoman, a Commander Mesley. And he was a ripper. My action station was on the starboard side of the bridge, and I heard Commander Mesley say to the snotty, "Snotty, get your thumb out of your bum and get on with your job." Well, the inevitable occurred. I burst out laughing. He was all deadly serious. "You think that's funny, do you, Nicholls?" And instead of saying, "No, sir," being very truthful, I said, "Yes, sir." Well, that went down like a lead balloon. He hardly spoke to me for the next week or two. He did come round in the end, and we got on pretty well. after my 6 months with him, I was the weatherman's assistant. And I worked with him for the rest of the war, doing his weather charts. I never forecast anything, naturally, because my job was to draw up the chart with the isobars. He would do the forecasting. Until right at the end, when he left the ship, I've got to say this last bit, it was in Tokyo Bay. This bloody storm came up, and the navigator, who was also acting as the weatherman, because the weatherman had left the ship, he said to me, "What do you think the weather's like, Nicholls?" I said, "We're in for a big blow, sir." That's all I said. He dropped another anchor on the strength of that, so we didn't run ashore. A couple of American ships, by the way, ran ashore. They hadn't got steam up before the wind hit them. He didn't say congratulations or give me a mention in dispatches or anything, but I thought it was pretty good. So I remained as a weatherman's yeoman right until I left the ship in Sydney Harbour. One of the first great sea battles ever recorded, related to the Spanish Navy and their huge battleships, joining in with the French battleships, totalling a number of 132 warships, meeting up against the British Navy, which did not have 132 warships, but half of them they were the British Navy, the other half were the privateers, the blokes who had been raiding the Spanish and the French ships for years, pinching the gold off them to give to the Queen and the King of the day. They entered into battle in the English Channel in 1588, and only 3 ships were sunk. But that's not uncommon with the old sailing ships, because they were timber. You either had to hit the explosions and blow them up, or burn them. So what finally finished off that huge battle was the wind. It blew the ships right, left and centre, till most of the Spanish ships ended up going up the eastern coast of England, right round the top of Scotland, down on the eastern seaboard near Ireland, where the Irish got stuck in them and they ran aground, and they ended up with a very depleted armed force when they went home to their countries. We end up with the last great sea battle of 1944 in Surigao Strait. That was the last time that battleships ever had a chance to fight battleships. It was so rare throughout the World War. So today, it's the aircraft carrier. That is the capital ship. So the last great sea battle that we were in, even though we may admit there weren't many battleships in it, it was the last great sea battle ever. It's never happened again, will never happen again, I think so. Well, just on our way to do our first bombardment at a place called Dulag in Leyte Gulf and up towards Tacloban, we had caught a mine on our portside paravane. Now, if you don't know what a paravane is, it's a cutting device to cut away mines that can bob to the surface and be exploded, hopefully away from the ship. Well, this was reported by an able seaman called David Matisky, who was congratulated by not only the gunnery officer, who was the officer of the watch, by Captain Nicholls himself. And what a good job he had done. After that report, of course, the mine did eventually cut its way free from the paravane, and because it was so close to our ship's side of 20 feet, we were not allowed to explode it in case we blow a hole in the side of our ship, and it was destroyed by an American destroyer escort astern of us. Everybody was watching this very dangerous bomb 20 feet from the ship's side. We'll just take into consideration we've just completed the landing in Leyte Gulf up at Tacloban and Dulag, instructed by General MacArthur, who commands the whole Southwest Pacific, and we wiped out all the gun emplacements, just clean them up as you go along and make sure it was easy for our troops. Right? Even some of the bombardment will just be 10 miles away, It depends on the depth of water. You've got to allow a big ship like that to turn around. And they don't turn around in 100 yards, as you can imagine. They turn around in a few miles. 8-inch we had, over 256 pounds. I don't know if you lifted one. I had trouble lifting one, I can tell you. And we were slowly travelling away from the landing scene when we were attacked by some aircraft, and one hit an American cruiser, and she was put out of action and was towed away with the support of a destroyer for repairs. And it was after this event that they decided to form up a great battle in the Surigao Strait to defend what we expected were Japanese attacks from the south. And as General MacArthur requested, and our Admiral Kincaid was in charge of the whole fleet, he directed Rear Admiral Oldendorf to arrange the battleships in formation. 6 battleships, 8 cruisers at the top of the strait, with the left flank cruisers and right flank cruisers either side of him, and with at least 27 destroyers divided into many destroyer squadrons. There was one squadron of destroyer kept above the 6 battleships to protect them from any attacks from the north. The others were given virtually free range, so with the 5 of them steaming around in all sorts of places waiting for the Japanese to come up the strait. When we got to Shropshire from England, we picked up the latest radar that they had developed. And just to give you a comparison, they were picking up other ships at about 60 miles. We were picking up at 180 miles away. So we had the top of the line radar equipment on the Shropshire, where the American captains were saying, listen to Shropshire's radar. But they didn't say that. Listen to Porthole's radar. Our code name was Porthole. And that was really magnificent, because we picked up the first fleet coming through the strait. Just before this occurred, of course, there was a little bit of action just below the strait, because some of the torpedo boats were stationed there by Oldendorf were shepherded away by the Japanese destroyer Surigao. So one of the American torpedo boats was so badly damaged, which had been allocated to tell the time that the Japanese fleet came into the arena, could not pass their signal on for about half an hour, which they did. I think it was 26 past 12 in the morning. So they were attacked by the torpedo boats. Then there were 39 torpedo boats stationed above, below and in the strait in preparation to do as much damage as they could. Well, they certainly attacked, but their attempts were rather futile in the middle of the night, because 10 of them were put out of action. One was finally sunk. The first indication that they came through the strait, and I know that it was our ship, the Shropshire, that picked it up on her radar. At 0003 hours, 3 minutes after 12, a fleet of ships were headed through the strait. We assumed they were Japanese. Started to head up north towards where we were situated. And that was on the 25th of October 1944. And that went on for nearly 2 hours before the first attack occurred at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And remembering it was still fairly dark, even though the sea was calm, all you could really see was the movement of shadowy ships up and down through the narrow straits of Surigao, which were 12 miles at the beginning, 30 miles long and 25 miles at the top. Not only that, there were quite a number of islands one had to contend with at the same time. At this stage, the whole battle fleet, as far as we were concerned, we were 17,000 yards away from the Japanese fleet coming up the strait. We struck home when they got within about 12,000 yards. However, the destroyers got in first and did what you might claim more than half the damage required to eliminate the Japanese. They were absolutely magnificent in their attacks on the Japanese First Fleet. At 0300, Destroyer Squadron 54 came in and fired 27 torpedoes. And 6 of those torpedoes hit the Japanese battleship Fuso. Within a very short time, the battleship exploded, split into 2, and just drifted away with hundreds of men in the water, which we have to assume most must have been killed by the explosion. It did not sink at that particular time. Another destroyer squadron came in at 3:11 in the morning and fired 20 torpedoes, and they made one hit. Another destroyer squadron 24 came in and fired 14 torpedoes, and she made a hit, and the other 3 destroyers of that particular squadron, 2 were sunk and 1 was disabled and left floating. And so what really happened in the end of all that damage that was done, only 3 ships finally pursued up north to attack the American fleet. That was 1 battleship, Yamashiro, 1 heavy cruiser called the Megami, and 1 destroyer called the Surigao. They were the only 3 ships left for us to sink. We opened fire at 03:51 in the morning. The cruisers, they got in first and attacked the Japanese battleship Yamashiro. We're not too sure at the time about whether they also hit the Megami, because she got very badly damaged during this attack and steamed south, disabled, and was finally sunk by the Japanese themselves with their crew taken off by a destroyer. Shropshire, which one we like to talk about, of course, didn't open fire to 03:56 at 4 minutes to 4. And that delay was caused by somebody leaving one of the hatches open in the gun turret. And now if you leave a gun turret door open when the guns go off, you're liable to do severe damage to all the members within the turret, probably death. So whoever did it, we don't know, but there was that delay of 4 minutes. So finally, everybody opened fire. Shropshire, in her excellent gunfire, the first time ever in its life, excelled itself with firing off 5 broadsides per minute, which it had never done before. Fired 32 broadsides, of which 16 had direct hits on the Yamashiro and 3 were smothered. The whole area was absolutely smothered with gunfire. Really, the firepower was great. You could hear the shells virtually from far as we were concerned, firing just to the side but over the top of us. Like cruisers the American had, they tended to rapid fire their guns. Instead of broadsides as we did, boom, they somehow or other appeared to be doing 1 gun at a time, very close. And they poured a stream of ammunition into the Japanese. Never-ending stream from their 15 6-inch guns on board their cruisers. Even I can remember seeing that to this day. Some American bloke described it. It looked like a train on the horizon, going across the horizon. Magnificent. Our captain even admitted he thought we were firing at the heavy cruiser. But there's not much difference on a radar set between the heavy cruiser and a battleship. They're both big long ships of over 600 feet long, and all you're getting is a minor shake. It lasted until exactly 9 minutes past 4 when the order of ceasefire was given, and it happened that way. However, once again the old ship Shropshire had just loaded its guns, and son, you never leave any big guns loaded with shells when they're hot. So she fired the last 7 of her 8 guns, and believe it or not, they hit the Yamashiro. So altogether, it was a magnificent battle to witness for what we did for the few ships left to actually fire upon. The destroyer Segura got slightly damaged during this altercation. We're not too sure who hit it, but she was damaged. But she sailed now south, and strange as it may seem, when she passed the 2nd Japanese battleships, which had already decided to turn around and leave the scene, she passed and didn't even tell them what had happened. It just passed the normal naval signals, and off it went into the blue yonder somewhere. The Yamashiro finally sank at 0419, at 10 minutes after the battle ceased. The Fuso, which was already badly damaged and exploded into two, finally sank at 5 p.m. that day. And it was reported from the Japanese after the war, they think it was the boiler that exploded her, not hitting the ammunition. Because if they'd hit the ammunition, it would have shattered her. Naturally enough, we were most concerned about the number of bodies floating in the water and the debris. In fact, you might say the water was covered with debris and dead bodies, but they disappeared rather quickly. Only 3 Japanese elected to be pulled up by the torpedo boats and saved to live another day, which was pretty amazing. On top of that was estimated the 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 1 light cruiser, and 4 destroyers, with about 5,000 Japanese died that day. Eventually the 2nd Japanese battle fleet of 7 ships just cruised out of the Strait and didn't last many more days before the bombers got them. The destroyers got them.